Hi guys, thank you so much for joining this video today. This is going to be a quick video. I just wanted to sit down and chat with you. The topic for today is researching African American genealogy, why it's challenging, and some tips and tricks you can use to overcome some of those challenges. So let's start by talking about why it is challenging to research African American genealogy. I think it's pretty simple and clear why there's a challenge. There just was not any due diligence applied to the process of documenting African Americans in this country, their presence or their contributions for hundreds of years, if I'm being honest. So that makes it very difficult for us now to track our history when we go back to try and find records, because many times those records are just not there. They either were not kept at all, or they are incomplete. There are huge gaps in the records. They're inconsistent from place to place. And all of those things make it very difficult for us to trace our family history if you are African American. And there's really no way around it. If a record doesn't exist, it doesn't exist. So we have to know how to continue with our research even when we run into those types of roadblocks. And we're going to talk a little bit about that later in this video. So when I research African American genealogy, I think of three distinct time frames in history. There is the post-slavery 1870 and forward research, and then there is research pre-Civil War during slavery. And then the third time frame is the same as the pre-Civil War period, but it is pre-Civil War researching the people who may have owned your ancestors if they were slaves. So that's three distinct time periods to me, because there are different techniques that you need to apply for each time period if you are researching African American genealogy to get you the best information possible. So let's talk about researching during post-Civil War, post-slavery. As mentioned, post-slavery research for African Americans usually starts with the 1870 census, because that's the first census that African Americans were listed by name. That's the first census that you see African Americans in family units on a census. That is the first census that is available for most African American families to review. I do want to add that some areas may have an 1866 census. That really depends on your area. You can look and see if there is data in an 1866 census for you. I have had some luck finding 1866 census records. So, but that's kind of hit or miss. 1870 is largely accepted to be the first accurate and most complete record of African Americans in this country as far as census records are concerned. So that's where it starts for post-slavery research. And then it just really moves forward until you get to 1950, which is the latest census that's available. But it is important to understand the smaller time periods within that window. So, for example, the 1880 census is typically a really strong census for African American research. It's the first census after Reconstruction, and there was an effort made to document African Americans at that time to make sure that the information was included when census takers went through some of these communities. There was actually an effort made to locate and identify Black people So for that reason, 1880 is a strong census if you're doing family history research. 1890 is a different story. That's not a strong census for anybody because there was a fire that destroyed 99% of the 1890 census. There are only a few counties in a few states that actually have data from the 1890 census. The 1900 census is also considered a strong census for African American genealogy because that's about 35 years after slavery. You have Black families who have created communities of their own. They have established uh, professions in certain cases. You know, they have family units and they're living their lives, and they are more than willing and ready for the most part to contribute to the census when the census taker comes by. So the 1900 census is typically a strong census as well if you're doing African American genealogy. However, that does change when you get to the 1910 census. And that is because the Great Migration is really getting started around that time. And the Great Migration is just when we had millions of African Americans from the South leave the South and they went north, west, and various places looking for better opportunities. What that means, though, for records and for us searching during that period is that you will often see a lot of split families during this time. You'll see minor kids living with grandparents. You'll see single parent homes. You'll see, you know, older kids going to different places, all trying to find more opportunity. And that's understandable. When we're doing the research for that period, though, it's important that we understand what's happening with society at that point and with migration because it will determine where you research and how you research and what information you actually find. But there's a lot of movement within the Black community all the way really through the 60s and the 70s. Now, we don't have a census available yet for 1960 or 1970, but expect to see some inconsistencies with locations and maybe names and all types of things as people move and try to rebuild or restart their life during the Great Migration. So that is what it's like to research in post-slavery. There's a lot more we could talk about. Obviously, there are military records because, I mean, you know, we had several wars during this time, and Black people participated in these wars. So there are military records for Black soldiers. I mean, there's a lot that you can research within this time frame. There will be additional videos on my channel specific to each of these time frames later. So make sure that you stay tuned for those. Okay, so the next time frame I mentioned is the pre-Civil War time frame. And it's not much to say about that. If your ancestors were slaves, they were considered property. And being considered property means they did not have records and documentation of their own. So you're going to have to look through records such as will records, land records, probate records, property records, because that's how slaves were viewed, as property. So if they are listed during that time, they will be listed in those types of records if they were slaves. They're not going to be on a census record for 1860 and earlier if they were slaves. So you want to shift your research focus to those types of records when you get back that far. So you're going to start by trying to track your family history to 1870. And once you track them to 1870, you're going to need to switch focus and start to research different types of records to find them if you are able to. So that's really the second time period. The third time period is during the same time frame. It's just that You're going to need to research the people who may have owned your ancestors if your ancestors were slaves. So, if they were slaves, they don't have records of their own. Their records are embedded in the records of the people who own them. That means you're going to need to research those people. Oftentimes, slaves migrated with their owners. So you need to know, where did these people come from, right? Did they come from North Carolina, Virginia, wherever? Where did they originate? How did they acquire slaves? When did they acquire slaves? Is it a possibility that my ancestor could be listed in this type of record or that type of record, that they may have attached to themselves as owners of slaves? So, again, this is a third type of research that you would need to do if you're looking to research African American genealogy. So, um, yeah, so those are the three time periods I would categorize, and that is post Civil War, 1870, and forward, and then there is pre Civil War, and then there's pre Civil War slave owner research. I will take a minute and say, we know that not all Black people were slaves in the US. We know that. But we also know that the majority of Black people were. So we can't ignore that either. Um, so, yeah, I just wanted to make sure to say that because I can already anticipate the comments about that. Okay. How do you get started with research? That is how we're going to wrap up this video. The first thing I would say is create a plan. If you are researching African American genealogy, you have to have a plan. You have to know how you're going to document information. Do you have time to do research? You don't have to spend 20 hours per week doing genealogy research. You may only have an hour per week to devote to genealogy research, and that is okay. You may only have 30 minutes, but just be able to set your own expectations so that you don't feel like you're wasting your time or you're not finding anything, or you're not meeting your goals. So make sure you have a plan in place, and that you are prepared to document what you find, because records are so sparse for us at times. You can find yourself looking at the same record 10 times over. So just, be efficient and make sure that you have a plan in place. I use a planner. I use the My Genealogy Planner from Ecestry. I will link that below. I've been using some type of planner for the past 20 years as I research genealogy. And sometimes when I don't use it, I'll go through a record 10 times. And I'm like, I've already seen this information. What am I doing? And it's because I didn't write down that I had already found it. So it's very important to document what you find. Then the next thing I would say is start with what you know. You guys, you know a lot about your family history. And if you don't know a lot about your family history, ask somebody. Oral history is very important in the African American community. It leads you to a lot of discoveries. Everybody always does their DNA because that's what's advertised the most. But DNA is not history. DNA is science. Your family history is your family's journey through time. It's your family's journey through events and cultural events and social upheaval and their migrations and their stories. So you need to get those. And if you're fortunate enough to have elders in your family, please take some time to speak to them, because what you will learn from them will help you in your actual research. But even beyond that, because I don't want you to spend like 3 weeks doing that and you don't get started doing anything else. You don't have to spend weeks or months collecting these stories before you start researching. Just take an hour and sit down and write down, what do you know about your grandparents? What do you know about your great grandparents? What do you know about your parents? Where is your family from? Are you living in Missouri, but you travel to California every year to see, older people in your family? Like, what do you know about your family? Just take an hour and write that down. That's very helpful for you to get started. Once you've done that, you basically are ready to start researching. And I would suggest for African American genealogy that you start researching either through census tracking or through creating your family tree on a site like Ancestry.com. Census tracking is just start with your latest census, which is currently the 1950 census. Start with that census, find your ancestor, and then try to find that ancestor in the prior years, in the prior census. So it would be 1940. And then try to find their parents or their family in the 1930 census, and then the 1920 census, and then so forth and so forth and so forth until you get to the 1870 census, and that will take care of that first time period for you. So that's census tracking. Then if you don't want to start with census tracking, use a site like ancestry.com. They're really the best at giving you hints for your information, and you can start building your family tree. Just enter as much information as you know, and Ancestry will start giving you hints about records where your ancestor may be found, and you just have to click on that hint and review the record and determine if that's your ancestor or not. So they actually do a lot of work for you if you start building your family tree. Keep in mind, Ancestry is not free. They do offer free trials. I'll link a free trial down below if you'd like to get started with that. There are a couple of free sites, not very many at all. I will have videos going over all of the sites that you can use, free and paid. Currently, I have a video up about Ancestry, so feel free to take a look at that one about getting started with Ancestry. But in general, that's how you get started to find information about your ancestors. Make sure you have a plan and be ready to document what you find. Talk to the people in your family. Prepare yourself to research. Set up a free trial. Get a free account. Do whatever you need to do to get access to the databases, because you're going to need that in order to research. And then you start researching. That's it. For African Americans, start with official records. That's why I suggested census records, and start working your way back. And then once you do that, you can start deep diving into additional records to add more context to your family. So I will have more videos about how you can explore expanded records and work with other databases. So make sure you subscribe to this channel and follow us so that you know when those videos are posted. Thanks for taking the time to chat with me today. I know this was kind of informal, but I appreciate you taking the time to watch this video, and good luck searching.